change. And the reason that candidates at all levels are talking about change is they understand something. And they understand that from one end of our country to the other, by vast majorities, the American people want to move America in a new direction. They want a new set of national priorities. The American people are angry. They are frustrated with the status quo, with politics as usual, and they want action, not just talk. They want action from their elected officials. The American people are tired of paying $3.20 for a gallon of gas when ExxonMobil is enjoying record-breaking profits. The American people are tired of paying more and more for health care, and over 8 million Americans have lost their health insurance since President Bush has been in office, while the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical industry continues to rip them off. The American people are tired of seeing their good-paying jobs go to China or other low-wage countries while they work 50 or 60 hours a week just to pay the bills. And when we talk about the economy today, let's not forget that the American people now work the longest hours of any people in the industrialized world. People are working incredibly long hours, 2 or 3 jobs, just to pay the bills. Mr. President, perhaps most importantly, the American people are deeply worried that the American dream is disappearing, that no matter how hard they work, no matter how many hours they spend on the job, that for the first time in the modern history of the United States, their kids will likely have a lower standard of living than they do. From a values perspective, I believe the American people are tired of the culture of greed, which has been so pervasive in recent years. A culture which says, yes, I am rich and I am powerful, and I've got billions and I want billions more, and I really don't care about anybody else in our society. I've got it and I want more. That's the culture of greed, which is just so pervasive in our society today. Mr. President, the amendment that will be offered today, that I'm offering, is co-sponsored by Senators Kennedy, Durbin, Clinton, Harkin, Schumer, Brown, and Mikulski. And I am quite confident that if this amendment is adopted, it will not be solving all of the problems facing our country. But on the other hand, if this amendment is passed, it will begin to move America in a very different direction with a very different set of moral and economic values. This amendment will tell the American people that we understand that Washington must adopt a new set of national priorities, that we must be concerned not just with the wealthy and the powerful who have so much influence over what goes on in Congress, but that the time is long overdue for Congress to begin paying attention to the needs of the middle class and low-income people who have been ignored and left behind year after year after year. Mr. President, I am very proud to tell you that my amendment has been endorsed by over 50 groups representing tens of millions of Americans. These groups include the AFL-CIO, AFSCME, the National Education Association, the Children's Defense Fund, the American Federation of Teachers, Easter Seals, the YWCA, the National Head Start Association, the SEIU, and the National Organization of Women, among many other groups. Mr. President, the budget that President Bush recently sent to Congress was nothing less than a disaster. It gave much to those who didn't need any help, while it took from those who needed help, including those living in desperation. As I mentioned to the people in my home state of Vermont, it was a Robin Hood proposal in reverse. It took from the poor and it gave to the rich. As a member of the Budget Committee, I am happy to say that under Chairman Conrad's leadership and hard work, the budget that we passed out of committee was far, far superior to what the President proposed and is quite a reasonable document. But, Mr. President, I think we can improve upon that document, we can improve upon that budget, and that is why I am offering this amendment today with my colleagues who are co-sponsoring it. Mr. President, this amendment addresses three major trends in American society that we must deal with in the budget process. First, the United States has the most unequal distribution of wealth and income of any major nation in the industrialized world, and the gap between the very rich and everyone else is growing wider. Secondly, it is a national disgrace that here in the United States of America, this great nation that we are so proud of, that we have by far the highest rate of childhood poverty of any major country on earth. And third, year after year, we have had record-breaking deficits, and our national debt is now approaching $10 trillion, a grossly unfair burden to leave to our kids and grandchildren, and in fact, a staggering sum of money which is economically unsustainable. And this amendment addresses all three of those issues. The amendment that I'm offering today puts the needs of our children, working families, seniors on fixed incomes, persons with disabilities, and the middle class ahead of the needs of the wealthy few. It says to the wealthy, you don't need any more tax relief when the middle class is shrinking, when poverty is increasing, and when you, at the top 1% level, have never had it so good since the 1920s. And it says to my colleagues here in the Senate, let us get our priorities right. Specifically, this amendment simply restores the top income tax bracket to 39.6% for households earning more than $1 million per year, and uses that revenue to address the most urgent unmet needs of our children, for job creation and for deficit reduction. Mr. President, 99.7% of Americans would not be impacted by this tax change. The only families that would be impacted are those that are earning at least $1 million a year. That is the top 0.3% of the American people. And what we are simply doing is asking that the upper tax rates go back to where they were during the Clinton administration, when I can remind you, the economy was far stronger. According to the Joint Tax Committee, restoring the top income tax bracket for people making more than $1 million to what it was in 2000 would increase revenue by $32.5 billion over the next 3 years, including $10.8 billion in fiscal year 2009 alone. Instead of giving $32.5 billion in tax breaks to the very wealthiest people in our society, including people who have billions and billions of dollars, people who really don't need any more tax breaks, this amendment would invest money in the following areas over the next 3 years. It would put $10 billion into special education, into the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Mr. President, over 30 years ago, the federal government made a promise that it would fund 40% of the cost of special education. Unfortunately, the federal government, shock of all shocks, has not kept its promise, and today we only spend about 17% of the cost of special ed. And what this means, I could tell you in Vermont what it means, and I'm sure it means the same all over the country, is that school districts are faced with growing costs regarding an influx of special ed kids. Property taxes are going up to accommodate those increased costs, and kids with special ed needs do not get the attention that they deserve. This amendment begins to reverse that process, begins to tell school districts all over America that we are going to keep our promise. We're going to begin adequately funding special education. Secondly, this amendment would also increase Head Start funding by $5 billion over the next 3 years. The simple truth of the matter is Head Start works. Its goal is to make sure that when low-income kids get into kindergarten or in the first grade, they are not already far behind everybody else, so that by the time they're in the 4th or 5th grade, they have given up, they have dropped out intellectually. Head Start works. The problem is that there are many, many families all over this country who want to take advantage of Head Start, but communities don't have the resources to open the doors for those kids. Mr. President, after adjusting for inflation, Head Start has been cut by 11% compared to fiscal year 2002. And boy, is that moving us in the wrong direction. Meanwhile, less than half of all eligible kids are enrolled in Head Start, and only about 3% of eligible children are enrolled in early Head Start. This amendment, again, will not solve all of those problems, but $5 billion will help and open the doors to large numbers of kids who desperately need Head Start education. Mr. President, this amendment would also provide $4 billion an increase of $4 billion for the Child Care Development Block Grant. I can tell you that the issue of child care is one of those issues that we have managed in Congress to sweep under the rug from one end of this country to the other, where you have mom and dad both working. Where is that working family going to find the affordable, quality child care they desperately need? We tell single moms, go out and work, but we forgot to tell them where they're going to find the child care that they need to take care of their kids. This amendment begins to do that with a $4 billion increase for the Child Care Development Block Grant Program. Mr. President, this amendment would provide $3.5 billion more for the food stamp program. I don't have to tell you that in the United States of America, shamefully, disgracefully, we're seeing more and more of our citizens go hungry. I know in Vermont, and I expect in communities all over this country, you are seeing working people, not unemployed people, working people going to food shelves to get the food that they need to take care of their families. That's not the way it should be. This $3.5 billion increase for food stamps is a step forward. Mr. President, this amendment would also increase funding for LIHEAP, the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, by $4 billion. In my state of Vermont, many other states, it gets very cold in the winter. We have seniors living on fixed incomes who cannot pay the rapidly escalating cost of home heating oil. LIHEAP is a successful program. It is underfunded. Nobody in America should go cold, and we put $4 billion more into LIHEAP. We put also in this amendment $3 billion more for school construction. Not only is it terribly important that our kids study in decent schools, schools which are not falling apart, schools which are energy efficient, but also by putting money into school construction, we can create a whole lot of good-paying jobs, and that's what that amendment does. And finally, last but certainly not least, this amendment would also reduce the deficit by $3 billion. In other words, at a time when we have seen record-breaking deficit, we're now closing in on a $10 trillion national debt. This amendment at least takes a small step forward in lowering this year's deficit. Mr. President, let me quote from a letter I received in support of this amendment from over 50 groups across the country, including the AFL-CIO, AFSCME, the NEA, the Children's Defense Fund, the American Federation of Teachers, East the Seals, the YWCA, the National Head Start Association, the SEIU, and the National Organization for Women, among other organizations. And here's what they say about this amendment, and I quote, "The economic downturn is creating a crisis for parents who work hard but struggle to afford nutritious meals as food prices escalate, to pay for energy for their homes and fuel for their cars, to pay for child care so that they can work, and to assure that their young children receive the building blocks of a solid education to prepare them for the future. Programs that assist in meeting these needs have been cut significantly in recent years, while tax breaks for millionaires have soared. My amendment addresses these needs. We are urging the Senate to adopt your fiscally responsible amendment to address the pressing needs of working families while restoring greater progressivity to the tax system." And I thank these organizations that represent tens and tens of millions of working Americans. Mr. President, the choice that we face is pretty simple. A lot of rhetoric goes on around here. It's pretty warm in this chamber. It's not only from the heat. It's from a lot of hot air from all of us. The time for talk is over and the time for action is now. This amendment is not going to solve all the problems, but it does say to the American people that the time is long overdue for us to move in a new direction. Very simple choice that we have to make. The richest people in this country have not had it so good since the 1920s. Frankly, they do not need any more tax breaks. They are doing just fine. But our children are not doing just fine. Senior citizens on fixed incomes are not doing just fine. And what this amendment begins to do, is to develop a new set of priorities for our nation. It tells the people of this country that we understand that working people are in trouble, they need assistance, and that the time is now to ask the wealthiest people in this country to rejoin the United States of America and to help us address some of our major social needs. Mr. President, my understanding is that later this afternoon this amendment will be brought forth, and I thank you, and I would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Hampshire.
The game plan as it's presently laid out is to go to Senator Alexander, then come back, and I'll go to Senator Sanders' amendment, then come back. And I'm not sure which is next, but there will be another amendment from our side. I just wanted to respond briefly to Senator Sanders. I respect Senator Sanders because he believes fervently in his view of the way government should work, which is you should just keep making it bigger, and you should keep raising taxes to accomplish that. But I do have to disagree with the basic philosophy that the present tax law isn't effectively raising taxes from high-income Americans. The simple fact is that over the last 4 years especially, we have seen a higher growth in revenues in this country than we've ever seen before. And that growth in revenues has come from wealthy, high-income Americans. Today, under this tax law, we have a more progressive tax system than was in place under President Clinton. The lowest 40% of wage earners who don't pay income taxes for all intents and purposes, some pay taxes, but the majority do not. They actually get money back under the Earned Income Tax Credit, are getting about twice as much back today under our tax laws than they got back under President Clinton's term. The highest percentage income earners, the top 20%, are paying more into the federal government than they were paying into the federal government under the Clinton years. I think it was 82% of federal revenues came from the top 20% of income taxpayers under President Clinton. Today, almost 85% of revenues come from the top 20% of income earners. That's a progressive system. Lower income people getting more back, higher income people paying more of the burden. And the reason it works this way under our tax laws is that we've created a fair and level playing field where people are willing to do taxable investment. Somebody who has income of significant levels has two options. They can take action to invest in a way which takes risk and generates jobs and also is taxable, or they can take action which takes risks, hopefully generates jobs, and probably isn't taxable because they use our tax laws in order to legally position their money so they don't have to pay the tax burden. And it is only human nature, as has been proven over and over again, that if you get the tax rates up too high, higher income people start to use legal means to reduce their tax burden. But if you get the tax burden set correctly, then higher income people take the risk, create entrepreneurship, or pursue entrepreneurship and create jobs, all of which generates income to the federal government. That's what's happening today. That's exactly what's happening today.
Will my friend yield?
I will yield after I finish making my comment. And the point here is, what is the right tax burden? Well, if you've got a progressive system where 85% of your revenue is coming from one group, the high income people, and the bottom income folks are getting much more back than they got historically back, you've got a very progressive system. And if you're generating more revenues to the federal government than you've historically ever generated over a 4-year period, and you're well above the average amount that the federal government receives, then it sounds to me like you got a pretty reasonable tax structure, which is giving a fair amount of revenue to the federal government. In fact, as a percent, we're well over what is the norm over the last 20 years. So I would argue that the tax structure which we presently have in place has worked to the benefit of the federal government in getting more revenue, which is being spent rather aggressively by the other side of the aisle. The senator from Vermont says, well, let's just raise it some more. raise that tax some more and we'll get even more revenue. I would argue that when you start to dump those rates back up, you're probably not going to get more revenue. You're going to dampen down economic activity. You're going to cause people to take action, which it causes them to invest in a way which reduces their tax liability. You probably end up reducing your revenues with that type of action. It's just human nature. And human nature and capitalist system tends to produce revenues when you have fair taxes and tends to reduce revenues when you have an overly burdened tax system. And I'd be happy to yield to the senator for a question, and then I do think
I like about my friend from New Hampshire, I don't know if it's a New England characteristic that I share. We are repetitious. We make the same points over and over again. And he is the ranking member of the Budget Committee. I've heard that point. He has heard my point. So let me make it again. My friend from New Hampshire, from the other side of the Connecticut River, he says, we have a progressive tax system. My God, those rich people are just paying a fortune. Well, wealthy people do pay a lot. You know why? Because the richest people in this country are earning far, far, far more than they used to, while the middle class is shrinking and poverty is increasing. For example, according to Forbes magazine, the collective net worth of the wealthiest 400 Americans increased by $290 billion last year. 400 families, $290 billion. The wealthiest 1% earn more income than the bottom 50%. Yes, my friend from New Hampshire, I do know they pay more in taxes. The reason is they get all of the money. Every economist understands that in recent years what's been going on is the middle class is shrinking, real income is going down, poverty is increasing, the rich are making out like bandits. Yes, they're making more, they're paying more in taxes because they're making a huge amount more. That's not progressive taxation. What that is about, next chart, is the fact that we have the most unfair distribution of wealth and income of any major nation on earth. And I ask my friend, don't you agree with me? That's my question. Of course you do.
My answer to the senator from Vermont was that we get two things from Vermont and New Hampshire, bad weather and bad economics. At this point, I'll yield the floor and allow the senator from Tennessee.
Senator from Tennessee is recognized.
Mr. President, before the senator from New Hampshire leaves, I wonder if I might ask him a question. Mr. President, I wonder if I might ask the senator from New Hampshire a question.